What's up guys, welcome back. So now the date of introduction of GST is now coming closer and a lot of stuff is going on into the industry. Like the government of India has now officially launched a Twitter account in which they are answering the question of the people by way of tweet. Although the answer is not satisfactory because the answer is just of one or two sentences, but that is an initiative. Then both ICAI and CBEC is now conducting a lot of workshop into the different places to educate the people like you. And then a lot of rules and the formats or the form has now finally been finalized by the GST Council, including the transitional provision form which the industry is waiting for so long. And then finally the consultant are scratching their heads because as the date is coming closer, the pressure on them is now building up because a lot of clients are asking the question relating to the GST. So in order to contribute to all the joint effort of all the people, I again come up with the RPQ in which I will again come up with a new or practical question so that you guys educate yourself a little bit. So in this RPQ we will discuss about the question like what will the consequence, what will happen in case you mistakenly pay the CGST and SGST instead of IGST, because you suppose you misunderstood that certain transaction is a interstate transaction. You misunderstood that it is an interstate transaction and you paid the IGST on that, but instead it was intrastate transaction, so you have to pay the CGST and SGST, but instead of paying CGST and SGST you paid IGST by mistake. So what will be the consequences, or whether we can rectify that kind of a mistake? And the second one is that whether you can rectify the return, because a lot of messages is circulating in the WhatsApp group like once you file the return you cannot change it, so make sure that you correctly file the return. So we will discuss about the question that whether we can rectify the return, and if yes, then how and under which section. And then we will discuss about the ITC utilization between the branches. So you have the two branches, then whether you can utilize the input tax credit of two branches or not. And then like the provision of services, when you provide the services before the introduction of GST but you raise the invoice after the introduction of GST, so whether you have to pay service tax or the GST, because you provide the service before introduction of GST but the invoice is issued after introduction of GST. So we will discuss about that whether you have to pay service tax or GST in that case. So we will discuss about that in the video. And then we finally conclude that what will be the case, what will happen in case you supply the goods or services free of cost, so whether you have to pay GST on that. We will also discuss it in this video. So this is going to be very practical, knowledgeable and interesting session. So without any delay, let's start the session. This is our first question of this RPQ, and the question is relating to the mistake happened that you paid the IGST instead of CGST or SGST. So what exactly will be the consequences in case you paid the IGST by mistake? Instead you should have been paid the CGST and SGST. And the question is, what will be the consequence if you paid IGST by considering it as interstate, but later we realized that it should have been intrastate and we need to charge CGST and SGST. So now you considered a transaction as interstate and you paid the IGST on that, and then later you realized that it should have been intrastate transaction and you should have been paid CGST and SGST. So what exactly will be the consequences in this case? Whether you can avail the refund or whether you can rectify your mistake. So the answer of this question is given under section 19 of IGST Act, and similar provision is under the CGST Act, which is section number 77. So section 19 is for the interstate supply mistaken, and section 77 is regarding you have paid the CGST and SGST by mistake. So both the provision is similar and it is under the two act. First one is section number 17 of IGST Act, in which you paid IGST by mistake, and similar provision is under 77 of CGST Act, in which you paid the CGST and SGST by mistake. And regarding the consequences, that what will happen or how you can take the refund. So the answer is, first step is that you have to pay the correct amount of tax. So when you paid the IGST by mistake, so the first step will be you have to pay CGST and SGST, which will be applicable on that transaction. So the first step is you have to pay the correct amount of tax of CGST and SGST. And the second question is whether you can take the refund of the IGST paid mistakenly. So the answer is yes. The person who has paid the tax on tax of IGST considering it as an interstate transaction can take the refund of that tax, and also he can take the refund of IGST if he mistakenly pay the IGST considering it as an interstate transaction, and also there is no need to pay the interest in case you paid later CGST and SGST tax. So the first one is that you have to pay the correct amount of tax under the correct law. Second stage is that you can take the refund of the tax which is mistakenly paid, and the third step is that you don't need to pay any interest in that case in which you paid the tax by mistake. So that is the exactly provision of how or what will be the consequences in case you paid the tax by way of mistake. The next question is relating to the rectification of return, whether you can rectify the return. And the question is whether a return once filed cannot be rectified in the GST. So you are asking this question because you saw some messages in which it is written that once you file a return it cannot be rectified. So whether it is correct, you want to ask me that whether the statement is true, whether that message is true that once you file the return you cannot change it. So the answer is no. You can rectify or revise the return under section 39 subsection 9 of CGST Act. Section 39 subsection 9 clearly allows you to rectify the error, rectify the omission if you find it after filing the return, and it should not be in consequence of any scrutiny or the assessment or the investigation. So if there is no scrutiny or no investigation happens to you and you by yourself find some kind of omission or some kind of error in your return, then you can rectify those return under section 39 subsection 9. But the next important question is what exactly is the due date of filing the revised return or rectified return. The due date of filing the rectified return is the earlier of the two events. There is two events which is mentioned under the proviso of section 39 subsection 9. So the first event is that the due date of return of September following the end of the financial year. So the first event is the due date of return of September following the end of the financial year. So suppose you want to rectify the return of December 2017. So according to the first clause, the due date will be the due date of filing of return of September following the end of the financial year. So the financial year in case of a return of December 2017 will be 1st April 2017 to 31st March 2018. So that is the financial year, and after the end of that financial year the next September is September 2018. So whatever will be the due date of filing of return of September 2018 will be the first event, and the due date of filing of return of September 2018 will be 20th October 2018. 20th October 2018. So the first situation or the first event is the due date of filing of return of September following the end of the financial year, and the second event is that the actual date of filing of annual return. So whatever will be the first event, whatever will be the earlier event will be the due date of filing of return of revised return. So that is the due date. Also you can also rectify the details of inward supply and outward supply which you need to file, which you need to upload under section 39 and under section 37 and 38. So you can revise also the detail or particulars which is mentioned under section number 37 and 38. You can also revise those detail of inward and outward supply under section 37 subsection 3 and section 38 subsection 5. So you can revise the return you can revise the final return which is provided under section 39. You can also revise the detail of outward supply, and you can also revise the detail of inward supply. But in case of final return, in case you are revising the return under section 39, you have to pay the interest on that, and the due date of filing that rectified return will be the earlier of the two events. First event is the due date of return of September following the end of financial year, and second one is the actual date of filing of annual return. The next question is relating to the utilization of input tax credit of one branch against the other branch which is situated in the different state. And the question is whether a person who has two branches in different states can use the input tax credit of one branch against the payment of GST liability of other branch. So you want to ask that you have two branches in different states, and then you wanted to use the input tax credit of one branch with the output tax liability and the GST of other branch which is located in a different state. So whether it can be possible? So the answer is no, which everybody knows. But what exactly is the reason why it is not allowed under GST? It is not allowed under GST because of two sections. First of all, section number 22, which talks about the registration under GST, says that every supplier shall be liable to get himself registered under GST in the state from where he supplies the goods or services. So he has to register himself in the state from where he makes a taxable supply. So the word is from where. So he has to get himself registered in every single state from where he supplies the taxable supply of goods or services. So it means if you have the two branches in different states, then you have to register for in every state in which from where you make the taxable supply of goods or services. So you have to obtain the two different registration number in the GST in two different branches if you are located in the different states, because under GST the registration will be happen under the procedure of the state. You have to register in every state from where you make the taxable supply of goods or services. And then also section number 25 subsection 4 says that if a person who has obtained or required to obtain more than one registration shall be treated as a distinct person for this act. So it means that if a person who is required to obtain or has obtained the registration which is more than one registration, so if you are obtaining or requiring to obtain more than one registration, then the two that person who has obtained the two different registration number will be treated as a distinct person. So if you have the two branches in different states, it means that you have to register for every single branches. And then if you register, if you have two different registration number, then it will be treated as a distinct person. And if you treat it as a distinct person, so it means that you cannot take the input tax credit of one branch, or you cannot use the input tax credit of one branch for discharging the output tax liability of GST for another branch. So the answer is no, because of two reasons. First one is that you have to take the registration in every state from where you make the taxable supply, and if you have obtained the more than one registration, then both the person will be treated as a distinct person, and then you cannot take the input tax credit. And one more point here is that if you are treated as a distinct person, if the law deemed you because of that as a distinct person, then the transaction which will happen between the distinct person will also be taxable under GST. So the stock transfer or the branch transfer is also liable to tax under GST, but the valuation will be done as per rule number 2 of valuation rule. So that is the case in case you want to discharge the output tax liability of one branches by using the input tax credit of another branch which is located in different state. So it cannot be happen under GST. The next question is relating to those cases in which the person has provided the service before the introduction of GST but received the payment and issued the invoice after the introduction of GST. So the question is whether he need to pay service tax or GST. There is a confusion in the mind of the person. So the question is a person has provided the service on 29th June 2017, which is before the introduction of GST, but the invoice is issued on 8th July 2017, which is after the introduction of GST. What should he pay, GST or service tax? And if there will be service tax, then shall I have to pay it before 31st or 30th June 2017? So the question is regarding those cases in which you provide the service before the introduction of GST, but you issued the invoice or received the payment after the introduction of GST. So the question is whether he need to pay the service tax or the GST. So let me just make you clear about that. So first of all, the levy of GST is on the supply of goods or services as per section number 9 subsection 1. So we all know that the levy of GST is on the supply, and there is also a section which is relating to the transitional provision, section number 142 subsection 10, which says that the goods or services supplied on or after the appointed date means the introduction of GST. So the goods or services supplied on or after the appointed date shall be the liability to pay under this act. So if the goods or services which will be supplied on or after the appointed date shall be liable to pay tax under this act. So if a person who is supplying the goods or services on or after the introduction of GST, then he need to pay the tax under GST Act. So the word is that supplied on or after. So if you supply any goods or services on or after the introduction of GST, then only you need to pay tax under GST. So in this case, we supplied the service on 28th June 2017, which is before the introduction of GST. Therefore, in these cases where you provide the service before the introduction of GST, then in those cases you need to pay the service tax, not the GST, because that service is provided before the introduction of GST. Therefore, there will be levy the service tax, and there is no need to pay the tax under GST. And the one can argue on another side of the GST, which is regarding the time of supply of goods or services. So the time of supply of services is earlier of the two events. First event is when you issue the invoice or when you receive the payment. So when you issue the invoice or receive the payment, whichever event is earlier is the time of supply of service. So if you look at our cases in which we issued the invoice on 8th July 2017 and also received the payment after the introduction of GST. So the time of supply in this case is after introduction of GST. So one can argue that time of supply of goods or services is after the appointed date, so therefore they need to pay the GST. So let me just make you clear that section number 13 subsection 1, which is the opening line of the time of supply of services, is that the liability to pay tax shall arise at the time of supply. So the opening wording of section number 13 is that the liability to pay tax shall arise at the time of supply. So it means that only the liability to pay tax will be arise at the time of supply. So time of supply is for the liability to pay tax, not for the levy of GST, but for the payment of taxes. So the levy of GST will be determined as per section number 9 and as per section number 142 subsection 10, which is the transitional provision, in which it clearly says that the goods or supply supplied on or after the appointed date will be treated under this act, will be taxable under this act. So therefore there cannot be any argument on the basis of time of supply, because the time of supply governs only the liability to pay, not the charging of GST or not the levy of GST. So therefore, in cases where the person supplies the service before the appointed date, before the introduction of GST, but receive the payment or issue the invoice after the introduction of GST, then in those cases the liability will be discharged under the service tax. And regarding the second question, which is that whether if the person who are liable to pay tax under service tax in this situation, so what will be the time limit, what will be the due date of making the payment, whether he should pay before the introduction of GST, The answer is there is no need to take the panic. In this case, you can easily discharge the liability and the service tax as per the provision of service tax. So whatever is the due date under service tax, you can pay the tax up to that date. Don't need to panic that you have to make the payment of the service tax before the introduction of GST. So there is no need to take the panic. You can easily, or you can comfortably pay the service tax within the due date which is prescribed under the service tax. So in cases where the person supplies the service before the introduction of GST or provides the service before the introduction of GST but issued the invoice or received the payment after introduction of GST, and in those cases the liability will be discharged under the earlier act, under the service tax act, and the payment is, you can make the payment within the due date of the service tax act. The next question is also very practical and it is related to the free supply of goods to the person. And the question is, a person who makes the charger gives the charger to a person who supply him back a complete mobile after deducting the price of a charger. Whether GST will be applicable on giving the charger free of cost to the person. So suppose a person who makes the charger and then he sells or he gives the charger to a person who makes the mobile, and that person who makes the mobile give him back a complete mobile after deducting the charges of that charger. So whether the person who are giving the charger free of cost, will be liable to pay GST. So the answer to this question is linked with the 2 or 3 section. There is a chain of 2 or 3 section which we have to first check, which we have to first test before we can say that whether that action is a supply of goods or services or not, or whether that action involve any payment of GST. So now first one is that we have to check out the meaning of supply. Section 7 subsection 1 gives us the definition of supply, and it says supply includes sale, transfer, barter, etc. for a consideration in the course or furtherance of business. So for making any transaction a supply, it should be for the consideration and it should be in the course of business. So in our example, the charger maker is giving the charger free of cost. We are just saying it a free of cost, but it is for the consideration. So if the supply is for the consideration, then only we can say we can charge the tax on any transaction. But the meaning of the consideration is defined under the CGST Act, and it is under 2 subsection 31. That section give us the complete definition of the type of the consideration. I am just giving you here the extract from that definition. The consideration include payment in money or otherwise. So it means that the consideration include the money or otherwise. Otherwise means in form of goods or in form of a service. So if a person who receives the goods instead of money, then also we can say that that is a consideration. So in our example, when the person who makes the charger give the charger to a person who makes the mobile, and that person who makes the mobile give him back the complete mobile after deducting the charger, after deducting the price of the charger. So in our case, the consideration is involved in that transaction, and the consideration is taking the complete mobile set. So in our example, there was a consideration which is hiddenly involved in this case. So therefore that transaction will be taxable under GST. Now the big question is how to determine the value in this case. The valuation will be done under section 15, or in case the section 15 doesn't allow to value that transaction, then we have to shift on to the valuation rule. So section 15 subsection 1 says that the value of supply shall be the transaction value where the price is the sole consideration. So if the price is the sole consideration, then only we can accept the transaction value. In our example, the price is not the sole consideration because it involves the exchange of the goods. So therefore we have to shift on to the valuation rule, and valuation rule number 1 says that in case where the price is not the sole consideration, we have to take up the open market value of that goods. So in example, we have to take up the open market value of the charger for charging the GST on that case. That is completely transaction, that how the GST will be applicable in case a person says that he is supplying the goods or services free of cost. But if suppose in our example the charger maker doesn't charge any money from the mobile maker, or he doesn't receives any mobile from that company, so suppose he is just giving the charger without receiving anything, even the money or even the mobile, he doesn't take anything from that mobile company, so whether in this case the GST will be applicable? So my answer is that it will depend, because schedule number 1 is a deeming schedule, is a schedule where they says that a supply, even if a supply is without consideration, then only it will be taxable under GST. Schedule number 1 defines or lists out certain activity which will be treated as a supply even if it is made without consideration, and one of the activity is that when the activity is between the related person. So in case you are related, and if you are giving the charger to a related mobile company, related company who makes the mobile, and you doesn't receive anything from that mobile company, then also that transaction will be taxable if you are related, and the valuation will be done as per valuation rule number 2. So in that case also the GST will be applicable. But if suppose the charger company is giving the charger to some random guy who doesn't involve or who is not related, so a guy come into the factory and he just supply one single charger to a person with free of cost without receiving anything in return, then in this case, because that person is not related and also that charger company doesn't receive anything back from that person, then in this case there will be no GST, because the transaction is not for the consideration and also it is not in the course of businesses. So therefore in that case, the case where a person randomly comes in the factory and then the company gives the charger to a random guy, in this case the GST will not be applicable. So that's how you have to check out that whether the supply is a free of cost or not, because there can be a hidden consideration which you are just ignoring, because the person says a free of cost, but by saying free of cost it doesn't mean that that is also free of cost in the GST. You have to check out the consideration which may be hidden in that transaction. So that's how you have to check out the taxability of free of cost. Alright guys, as usual, subscribe the channel, share the video and give that video a big thumbs up if you like it. And you can also ask the question by sending an email to sharwangst.148@gmail.com, sharwangst.148@gmail.com. So guys, we will meet in the next video. Till then, bye bye.